In the endless reaches of the universe, Earth seems unique. It's a planet shaped and molded by life. A planet that 6 billion people call home today. But when it was born, some 4.5 billion years ago, Earth was a violent place. So hostile, it's hard to believe life could ever begin here. Covered in lava and smothered in noxious gases, Earth was a planet under siege.
This was a hazardous world, no doubt about that. If you were located in the wrong place at the wrong moment, you were simply vaporized.
It was a planet plagued by catastrophe. If you condense all of Earth's history to just 24 hours, then only minutes after it formed, the entire globe melted and reformed. Then, to make matters worse, another planet about the size of Mars slammed into Earth. A cataclysm that created our moon. But soon after these disastrous beginnings, the most radical transformation of all time hit the planet. The origin of life.
When we think of early Earth, we must recognize it was not a Garden of Eden. There were no clear blue oceans. There was no clear water. There were no plants. There was no life at all.
The young sun was weaker than it is today, and its light barely penetrated the atmosphere of carbon dioxide, spiked with the pungent fumes of hydrogen sulfide.
Since the atmosphere was thicker and dominated by CO2, the Earth had a reddish tinge to it. It didn't have the familiar blue sky. The oceans would have had an olive green color rather than our familiar blue color.
For about the first 600 million years, comets and asteroids pounded our planet. A time known as the heavy bombardment. These interplanetary missiles measured up to 300 miles across. Their impacts vaporized Earth's oceans and melted its crust. With its extreme temperatures and toxic rain, seemingly nothing could survive here. But we now think that in this hellish environment, life first took hold. And today, hidden away in remote corners of our planet, conditions that in some ways resemble the extremes of early Earth can still be found. Penny Boston and Diana Northup are microbiologists on an expedition to investigate how life can survive in those harsh surroundings. Buried in the depths of this tropical rainforest is a cave called Cueva de Villaluz. Located in southern Mexico, it's an underground world laced with hydrogen sulfide, a foul-smelling gas that was present on Earth some 4 billion years ago.
These relic or antique environments like Cueva de Villaluz offer the same kinds of environments that we would have found on early Earth, and we're hoping to get clues to work backwards from those.
Hydrogen sulfide can be extremely poisonous, so the scientists have to wear gas masks inside the cave and carefully test them for leaks.
No leaks? Have you got everything in there?
I think I got everything.
At the levels at which humans can't live very long in hydrogen sulfide, you don't smell it at all. And it will just simply cause you to go unconscious and die very quickly.
But can any other forms of life survive in the deep recesses of the cave, so toxic to humans? Here, hydrogen sulfide, an invisible gas, escapes from the underground springs, reacts with oxygen in the water, and coats the cave with sulfuric acid.
The longer it sits there on the walls, the more acid it becomes. And so eventually, by the time the drop is falling on you, it's a very, very acid environment.
The slime layer feels pretty thick today.
It's very fatiguing, and even with the protective masks that we have, we pick up loads of toxic gas through our skins and perhaps through tiny leaks.
Oh, get them out of those sweat tights to your left. Oh, yeah.
Amazingly, despite the extreme conditions, it appears that life is thriving inside the cave. It comes in a strange package, colonies of single-celled bacteria that form slimy drips scientists call snotites.
The snotites are drippy, gooey, mucousy formations that look like stalactites, and that's why they were called snotites, but because they resemble strings of snot. We believe that the snotty, gooey stuff is to protect them against extreme acidity, because when we measure the drips on the snotites, they are as extreme as battery acid. And so while we find that daunting, this is where they thrive.
Bacteria are among the most primitive and most common organisms on Earth. Like all forms of life, they grow, adapt to their environment, and reproduce. Inside each single-celled bacterium is a molecule of DNA, the code of life, which allows them to multiply. There are millions of bacteria in each snotite. And down in the underground streams, Penny Boston has found different kinds of bacteria in slimy clumps she calls phlegm balls. In fact, the cave is home to a huge number of bacterial colonies. And astonishingly, instead of being poisoned by the hydrogen sulfide, these bacteria depend on it for their survival.
They take the hydrogen sulfide and they get chemical energy out of it. It doesn't poison them. It's home sweet home for them. And this is a pretty new finding for these organisms.
Conditions on early Earth may have been far worse, but these bacteria suggest that primitive life could have thrived in extremely hostile environments. But where did the very first life come from? For more than a century, scientists have known that life is the result of chemistry, the combination of just the right ingredients in just the right amounts. Today we know these ingredients aren't things like dirty garments and wheat, which people used to think would spontaneously generate mice. The ingredients of life are actually much simpler. All living things, from bacteria to mice to you and me, are made from a small set of chemical elements. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, 4 of the most common elements in the universe. Combined in just the right way, these are the fundamental ingredients of life. And carbon is the star of the show. And the idea that life could have started when carbon and other ingredients combined in the harsh conditions of early Earth was first put to the test in the 1950s by a young graduate student named Stanley Miller. To simulate the newborn Earth in the lab, Miller assembled a contraption made out of flasks and tubes. He filled one flask with gases thought at the time to represent Earth's primitive atmosphere. And he connected that to another flask with water to represent the oceans.
And then he did a brilliant thing. He simply put an electric charge through that to essentially simulate lightning going through an early atmosphere. And after sitting around for a couple of days, all of a sudden there was all this brown goo all over the reaction vessel. And when he analyzed what was in the vessel, now he actually had amino acids.
Amino acids are compounds that form when molecules of carbon and other elements link together. They are the essential building blocks of proteins and cells, vital ingredients of all living things.
Life is really chemistry. There's no question about that. In fact, it's a chemistry that when you get the recipe right, it goes, and it goes fairly quickly.
That recipe is hotly debated today. And most scientists think the environmental conditions on early Earth were very different from the ones Miller simulated in his lab. And another debate rages about when this recipe first got cooked up. On our 24-hour clock, the barrage of asteroids and comets lasted from about midnight until almost 3:30 in the morning. The assault then weakened, but continued for more than 100 million years. It's hard to believe that life could have gained a foothold during this unstable period. But new discoveries reveal that life may have existed as early as 4 in the morning, or about 3.8 billion years ago. If it emerged so early, life was lucky to miss the greatest cataclysm of all time. An impact like no other in our planet's history. It happened when another rocky sphere about the size of Mars collided with Earth. The outer layers of our planet were vaporized, and the debris from this collision coalesced to form the Moon. That impact was so powerful that any building blocks of life that existed on Earth would have been destroyed. This gives rise to speculation that the ingredients of life didn't form on Earth at all, but arrived special delivery from outer space.
From its size and its appearance, this thing came from outer space. I even have reason to believe that there's some form of life in it.
Space is only about 20 kilometers that way. Now that's very close, and space is vast.
In a region of space called the asteroid belt are huge amounts of debris left over from the formation of the solar system. And sometimes, chunks of debris containing metal and rock fall to Earth, bearing surprising gifts. One such meteorite landed in the town of Murchison, Australia in 1969.
It's a gold mine, this little chunk of meteorite which fell on Australia last year. For the past 6 months, they've been taking it apart and have discovered it contains amino acids, the building blocks of life.
It was the first time that complex organic compounds had ever been found in material from space. And if meteorites like it were common, perhaps they had delivered vast quantities of the original constituents of life to early Earth.
Enough organics are present here that we think that meteorites like this provide to the early Earth its entire budget of organics. So all the organics in your body, all the carbon in your body, and in your lunch you had today, arrived on the Earth in meteorites like this. If they come in the atmosphere in large enough objects, they're like little capsules coming in the atmosphere. They break apart on the Earth's surface and deposit their cargo of organics.
More than 70 kinds of amino acids have been found in meteorites. And many are the fundamental ingredients of proteins that make up living cells. During the heavy bombardment, millions of meteorites may have seeded the Earth with the stuff of life. But the leap from non-living ingredients to a living creature, complete with DNA which allows cells to replicate, is staggeringly complex. No one knows how this process started or what course it took.
It is hard to really get your head around the great leap from non-living to living.
Well, it's hard enough that nobody's succeeded in doing it in the laboratory.
I think it's an astonishing mystery and one that we truly don't understand in any great detail.
While we don't yet know how the spark of life occurred, we can try to figure out where it might have gotten a foothold. And because the planet was under such devastating assault from comets and meteors, the leap to life may not have taken place up here on Earth's surface.
And the mining environment gives us this fantastic window into the deep subsurface. It's a unique scenario because there is nowhere else on planet Earth that allows you to have access to that sort of sample location at 2, 3, 3.5 kilometers deep.
The temperature of the rock is 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air pressure is twice that at Earth's surface. Life down here survives entirely without sunlight. If they exist, microbes need to find a way to live in pitch darkness, drawing chemical energy from water and minerals trapped in the surrounding rocks.
Microorganisms have been shown potentially to be able to use these molecules to provide themselves with energy and support themselves completely independent of photosynthesis.
And Earth's crust may not have been the only place where life could have hidden from the heavy bombardment. Another safe haven may have been the ocean. Volcanic activity was intense on the early Earth. Chemicals from deep inside the planet spewed into the primitive seas. Even today, marine biologists have discovered volcanic vents on the ocean floor. Despite scalding temperatures, acid eruptions, and total lack of sunlight, they found creatures of all types thriving down here. And at the bottom of the food chain are microbes that live on the noxious hydrogen sulfide gas erupting from the vents. On early Earth, primitive life may have survived in similar environments. By about 3.5 billion years ago, or 5 o'clock in the morning on our 24-hour clock, the bombardment of asteroids and comets had ceased. With far fewer violent impacts on Earth, microbial life could now survive outside its protective hiding places. After it reaches Earth's surface, life would take advantage of another source of energy, the sun. Up here, microbes evolved a green pigment known as chlorophyll. This allowed them to trap sunlight and use it to drive a chemical reaction that converts carbon dioxide and water into food. Called photosynthesis. It was a clever invention that enabled some bacteria to grow and reproduce almost without limit. Once it started, photosynthesis was a runaway success. And today, it's how all green plants make their living. As Earth cooled, this new generation of cells spread across the oceans. immense colonies of green slime would take over the world, kicking off the greatest transformation in our planet's history.
Photosynthesis is the great liberator of biology. With photosynthesis, the energy is coming from the sun, and life could spread literally over the entire planetary surface.
And it's the cyanobacteria that would bring about the most astounding change in Earth's history. A change that could have started as early as 3.5 billion years ago. Over time, stromatolites would spread out across the planet. As a byproduct of photosynthesis, the ancient bacteria produced a waste gas, oxygen. On our day-long clock, this process continued until 1 in the afternoon. Eventually, oxygen produced by cyanobacteria began to build up in the atmosphere. Slowly but surely, this transformed the planet. Over the next 8 hours or so, tiny microbes raised the level of oxygen from less than 1% to today's 21%. The time was about 9 p.m. It's amazing to contemplate, but without cyanobacteria, there would be no oxygen, and Earth would still be smothered in noxious gases. Plants, animals, and humans would have never evolved.
We're sitting here today breathing an oxygen-rich mixture of air. We couldn't be here without that oxygen, but that oxygen wasn't present on the early Earth, and it only became present because of the activity of photosynthetic organisms.
Life has made this environment what we know. It's allowed us to live on the surface. It allows us to breathe. It allows large organisms like we are to function at very high rates of activity.
The oxygen also helped protect life from the sun's lethal ultraviolet radiation by creating a layer of ozone in the upper atmosphere.
One of the fascinating properties of that is that it actually screens out, just sort of like a sunscreen does on your skin, screens out this harmful radiation.
With the protection of the ozone layer, life was able to diversify into more complex organisms. It took only the last 3 hours of the day for all other life forms on our planet to evolve. The first multicellular life emerged at 6 minutes past 9 in the evening. Then came fish and insects and reptiles. By about 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, dinosaurs roamed the earth. The first primates appeared at 20 to midnight. And with less than 30 seconds to go, the first humans made their appearance.
It's only been the last 10% of the Earth's history where there was life on the surface of the Earth that you would see with your naked eye. So for most of Earth's history, life has basically been invisible on the Earth.
Over 1 billion or 2 billion years, the amount of oxygen that these little creatures produced was enough to actually change the entire atmosphere of the planet.
Multicellular life that we're most familiar with, animals, plants, their environment was made possible by the slow, toilsome task of bacteria to oxygenate the atmosphere.
Microbes ruled the Earth for more than 3 billion years, 2/3 of its history. These tiny organisms had transformed an entire planet. Without them, complex life, humans included, would have never evolved.